Welcome to First Time for Everything, a podcast for curious people. I'm your host, Dani Elliott. I've toured the world as a backing vocalist for some of the biggest names in music, owned a prop rental business, ran a vintage boutique out of a camper I renovated, and have had a lot of firsts in my life. I created this podcast in hopes of inspiring you to take a chance on something you've been wanting to try for the first time, and we are going to discover a lot of really fun things together, and I'm so happy you're here. Welcome to First Time for Everything. Welcome back, first timers. Today I'm talking with two of my good friends, Amy Vale and Adam Jackson. The abridged version of our friendship story is Adam and I first met back in college in New York. We became fast friends, and he was my drummer in my band for years. And then I met Amy through some Aussie friends I have. We became friends, and Amy and Adam met a few years later. Oh my gosh, did they meet because of me? Did I introduce them? Am I just putting this together right now? Amy and Adam, you guys tell me if I'm wrong, but oh my gosh, okay, it's very exciting. Anyway, these two wonderful people fell in love, got married, and cut to them moving to Austin a few years ago where they became foster parents. So I've been wanting to do an episode on this topic as I have some friends who have become foster parents or who have considered or are considering it. And I knew Amy and Adam could shed some light on what the experience is like for all of us to learn from. So we talk about how to stay connected as a couple through fostering, what the purpose of fostering truly is, and how they navigate the nuances of the system in day-to-day life as foster parents. Also, just want to give you guys a heads up that we had some sound difficulties, so I did my best that I could trying to mix everything and make it sound as level as possible, but just bear with me. I'm doing the best I can. Thank you guys for hanging out and listening, and this is First Time Becoming a Foster Parent with Amy Vale and Adam Jackson. One of the reasons you're probably listening to the show is because you like to learn new things, and Skillshare is the place to do just that. One of the founding principles of the internet was to give people access to information they wouldn't normally have access to, and Skillshare has taken this to the next level by creating 29,000 courses with new ones added to their roster every week, ranging from creative writing to marketing to website development and really whatever you're looking to get better at. You'll get to try Skillshare free for 1 month before choosing between two very affordable options at $29 a month or $165 for the year, which comes out to about $13.75 monthly, which is an insane deal for the amount of knowledge you'll be getting access to. Get 30% off your annual membership at the link in the show notes and start learning, well, everything. Now back to the show. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. I am with my old-time pals, Amy Vale, Adam Jackson, and these are some great friends of mine from our time in New York, and they have recently, in the last few years, started foster parenting, and I really wanted to talk with them about that process. So, yeah, how did you guys decide you wanted to become foster parents? Was that something you had each individually thought about doing at some point in your lives, and then when you got together, like, started talking about it? Or is it something that kind of evolved in your relationship that you were like, hey, this would be something that we feel drawn towards?
I think it's something that definitely evolved in our relationship. Amy and I met. We were both such career-forward people that we had absolutely no interest in children whatsoever. That is an actual fact.
Same.
Since we moved to Austin, we've finally had space, mental space and emotional space to think about that. And I'm sure you can
Totally.
agree. When you're in New York, when you're in the thick of it, your energy is always gotta grind, gotta make more money, gotta step it up a level.
Mm-hmm.
And in New York, our lives were so much of us seeing each other in passing.
Mm.
Me on the road all the time, Amy going into the city for work and working 8 to 8 all the time. We just didn't have time for that. Whenever we did have time, it was just spent focused on just catching up with each other.
Yeah.
But our lives in Austin have offered us the space to have that ability to just think about having a family.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
would you agree, Libby?
Yeah, I mean, adoption has always been something that's been top of my mind. I sort of was introduced to adoption very early in my childhood. We had backpackers come through my parents' property, and one of those backpackers we became very good friends with. And he ended up adopting a child from Africa and taking them back to the UK. So I was able to see the impact that adoption can have. And also understood that it was grounded in loss. Like for adoption to happen, there has to be a loss.
Yeah.
But also that it's very sweet to see a child be able to thrive and flourish and to have opportunity. And so that was always something that was top of mind for me growing up, and understood the value of the role that that can play. And I had personally never had the desire to have biological children, to be pregnant or any of those sort of experiences. That just personally wasn't important to me. So oftentimes when we would sort of come to the conversation of family and what that looked like, it wasn't necessarily to go through a traditional process. It was something that I think adoption and foster care was always definitely at the top of my mind if family was going to be a thing for us.
Yeah. And so when you guys decided to move forward with this process of becoming foster parents, like what did that look like? How did you get started? What is the process like of like applying to become a foster parent to actually like having a child in your home?
Yeah, so every state has different processes, but the process we went through in Texas was we attended a orientation that was run by the department. So they basically sort of give you a very, very high level overview of what it looks like, what you're sort of signing up for in very sort of headline terms, if you will. And then they sort of give you a list of agencies that are registered with them. And so the way that it works is that we have an agency that basically oversees our home. So our home is technically licensed, not us.
Okay.
And so they're responsible for making sure that the home is compliant, that we're compliant, up to date on trainings, all of those different things. And so you have to go through the process of selecting an agency to be able to sort of oversee you. And some of them are faith-based organizations, some of them aren't. And for us, it was important to orient our search towards non-faith-based organizations. And so we landed on an agency that, unfortunately, we found out they got shut down for not paying families their monthly stipend. So they went through a big legal issue and were shut down. We sort of got not caught up in it, but we just were affected by it because we were licensed, and then we had to find a whole new agency to go to. So,
and how long does that usually take?
So the licensing process for us took 12 months.
Okay.
That is, I don't believe that's the norm.
Okay.
It still can take a while, but it's really more dependent on how quickly you want to move through the trainings.
Okay.
But ultimately, there's background checks with fingerprinting. They do like look at your tax returns. You do a bunch of different trainings and sort of try to get you prepared for what you're going to be coming into contact with, mostly related to caring for the children. So you're not going to get a full picture of what an actual placement looks like outside of the child being in your care, which I think was the biggest thing that we had to learn the hard way. By going through that process.
Yeah, it's just like you just don't know until you're in it, basically. So on that tip, like what were your concerns you had before going into foster parenting versus like what your concerns are now that you're actually like in it?
Yeah.
I think before, not knowing really what to expect, just assume that every kid coming from a trauma-based situation is just going to be a tornado coming into your home. So in a very vague sense, you just kind of worry about material things and your house being tore up. It's just to be complete.
Yeah.
Versus now, I think one thing that we're concerned about is, how we'll be able to show up for the child and what what the initial connection with the child would be. We've done quite a bit of respite. Our first respite assignment, after 3 days, we fell in love with the kids. But, the long and short of it was we didn't have the means or the time and space to really take care of 2 children. We had to make a very difficult but sound decision in, allowing them to be placed with a family that could do that. For the fact that children that are coming from trauma-based situations, they need extra time.
Yeah.
Extra care. Whereas we've had other placements where it is most certainly a respite assignment that is just babysitting. You give a kid the best care that you can. You offer them a safe space. You offer them some structure until they go back to their placement or they go back to their parent. And that is all that you can offer them, and that that's all that you can offer them because there's no connection.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yeah, I think from the sort of perspective of before we ever had a placement, as we're going through the training process, my biggest fear was that I was not going to be enough. Like these kids have come from such hard places, and through no fault of their own are they in this system. And oftentimes it's like you do, like the sort of big myths of foster care are that, kids are going to come in and that, things will be broken or they'll be struggling pretty materially. And that does happen. But the thing that you're taught through the training process is that there's different levels of care that you sign up for. So we're licensed as a basic home. So it's children that don't need sort of very intensive care.
Okay.
It's moderate. And then I believe the third level is specialized. And then it sort of goes up into like medically fragile.
Okay.
So there's like several different levels of expertise that you're trained in. And we're only trained in basic. And so the kids that are experiencing those really, really hard times and very much struggling, they're usually in sort of the more higher categories. And so the families are more equipped to care for them. So that was sort of something that I learned through the process, but just not being enough for them was my biggest fear because it's just like they deserve so much. Like they've had such hard experiences and they're so young that you want to give them everything and you want to be able to fix it and you want to be able to support them. And that's just sometimes not enough.
Yeah.
And so that was probably my fear going into it, or the thing I was worried about. The thing that I've learned since being in the system is the things that they don't really talk about in the training process. And that is that you're a part of legal proceedings. That was sort of one of those things where I've never stepped foot in a court before.
Yeah.
So it was very daunting to be, an anonymous figure in a court proceeding, knowing that we don't necessarily have a voice or a say or an opinion, but we do have the right to be there and witness what is happening in the case because it pertains to the child in our care. And I think the other part is that, no one tells you that you are going to witness some of the hardest parts of humanity, and you just have to watch it. There's literally nothing you can do because you are not a legal party to the case. You do not get to have an opinion, but you watch this complex, nuanced, difficult part of being a human unfold before you. And sometimes the system works in the best possible way for the child, and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. And how do you guys mentally and emotionally and spiritually kind of navigate that? Because that's something I've thought about a lot, something I've talked about with some friends of mine who are in the process of doing this or have thought about doing it. And I know I tend to take stuff on very deeply. I take stuff on that I have no control over. And it seems like you cannot do that in a situation like this, or you would just be emotionally drowning. What do you do to I don't know, just handle it?
One thing that's really helped is the agency that we're with now. They have in-person trainings. That's allowed us to connect with other foster families.
Okay.
I think that's one thing that a piece of advice that I would give to anybody that is thinking about doing this is find people who can relate. Because the truth is, people with biological children, even though they know what it means to be a parent, they do not know what it means to be a foster parent,
Mm.
or honestly, really deal with the kid that comes from a place of trauma.
Mm.
They don't really understand that, you know, and they also don't understand kind of what Amy was explaining, having parental responsibilities and duties, but actually having your hands tied when it comes
Yeah.
to sound decisions for a young person's life that you're caring for. You know, that's something that they just won't understand. So it's very important to have people in your life, other families, other friends that can relate.
Mm.
Also, I just talked to some of my other friends that are parents, or just people that come from a similar spiritual place that I do, that I can talk to for counsel, has gotten emotionally tough, you know, in certain instances. And we always check in with each other. We always make sure we have time to debrief at the end of the day, or go on a walk and just really talk to each other about what we're feeling and what we're going through.
Yeah. So speaking of like the court proceedings, things like that, what is your kind of day-to-day like, or like monthly kind of thing? Like, are you having to like check in or go to those like kinds of court proceedings on a regular basis? How often are you doing that? What does it just kind of look like on a day-to-day, weekly, monthly kind of schedule?
Yeah, so the the sort of weekly schedule is our current placement. We have a normal routine that oftentimes, like, I've found that the first 30 days or 2 months was the hardest part. There's a lot of doctor's appointments. So when you first take placement, you have 3 days to take that child to a medical provider where they do a like intake to make sure there's no like physical issues wrong with
Sure.
the child. And then there's also a 30-day checkup. So it's sort of to follow up if they're behind on immunizations or anything like that.
Mm.
And there's also sort of, depending on the age, there's different assessments that they have to have.
Mm-hmm.
So there's sort of a list of different medical appointments that have to happen in the first 30, 60, 90 days.
Okay.
There's usually a court hearing. I believe it's meant to happen within 2 weeks, but I think there's sort of flex in that, where it's called an adversary hearing, where it's basically whether the family wants to contest the removal and provide evidence as to why the child shouldn't have been removed. And then it sort of moves into a pretty standard flow of like a status hearing and an initial permanency hearing, a permanency hearing checkup or like check-in, and then there's sort of a final permanency hearing. And so what happens between all of that time is the parents are working services, and they're services that they have to agree to, and the department submits those to the court, and it could be a range of things just depending on the case. And so those services get worked. Our current placement has a weekly visit with her parents.
Okay.
However, it can be different depending on the age of the child. You know, I've seen some placements that have visits 2 times a week for 2 to 4 hours. It really just depends.
Okay.
And so that sort of piece of it, we work very closely together with her team, and that includes the DFPS caseworker, and they have custody of her in the court's eyes. And then there's a CASA worker. Their role is to advocate for the child in court. There's also a attorney that's representing the department, an attorney that's representing the child, and then attorneys that are representing the parents as well. So there's a pretty big group of people that are involved in this one particular case. But the court hearings don't happen super regularly unless there's a motion filed, where then a sort of ad hoc hearing will occur. But aside from that, it's really lots of paperwork and forms to fill out. The standard is to provide a monthly progress report, and it's all sort of based on things that are related to the child's age. So eating, sleeping, you know, things like that if they're an infant, like developmental milestones. But then there's other things as they get older that are reflected in the report. And then any sort of documentation, anytime you see a doctor, there's a 9-page form that needs to be filled out. And it has to be printed. You have to have that filled out. Otherwise, you're going back to the doctors to get that filled out. It's just a part of the requirements.
Mm.
We currently send a weekly update just to the nuance of the case, and because of the age of the child that we have with us at the moment.
Okay.
So there are sort of elements that can flex depending on the case, but for the most part, there's always weekly visits. There's always at least a monthly report. There's always documentation for doctor's visits or dental visits or psychology visits or any of those kinds of things. And if something serious were to happen, like let's say if there was a kiddo in our home that ran away, then there would also be something called a serious incident report that we would have to file. And that's just documenting what happened, what the resolution was, all of those kinds of things. And a lot of it is just to go into the file to make sure that it's all sort of covered in case something comes up in the case.
Okay. How long do you typically have kids for? Or does that vary as well?
It really depends.
Most respite assignments are going to be for a minimum, I think, of a day to 72 hours.
Oh, wow.
But a maximum only of 2 weeks.
Okay.
Respite can't really exceed 2 weeks. So we've done respite for a few days, and we've also done it for our first assignment was one entire week.
Okay. Also, too, just getting back to like the visits part of it, you're saying that the child you have now has visits with the family. Is that overseen by like a social worker? Do they come to your house? Do you bring her there? Do you meet at a neutral location? How do you are you guys in touch with the parents at all? How does that work?
Yeah, so currently they're monitored by the department at department offices.
Okay.
And that is oftentimes the case for the majority of circumstances when they're early in the case. So some cases can go for several years, unfortunately. And so in those dynamics, sometimes different arrangements can be made where you're meeting at a park or something like that. But when you're sort of in the formality of the court proceedings and the case itself, the majority of the visits that we've been sort of privy to are usually held at the department's offices and are supervised by oftentimes the worker and the CASA.
Okay. So you guys are never in touch with family like directly?
No, we're currently anonymous.
Okay.
With our current case. However, there's been previous cases where I don't think there's ever any sort of reluctance if the dynamics are right. And again, it's hard to appreciate the pain and the hurt that the parents are going through, and how you're not really getting their best selves when they're interacting with you.
Of course,
And so I think it's sort of one of those situations where it's really case dependent, and sometimes it can evolve over time. And sometimes it's just not the best to have contact information, but to find ways to facilitate communication through her team or through, other ways, so that they can still maintain that connection with their child.
Women's health is extremely important to me, and I think modern fertility is one of the most exciting, accessible new advancements to come out in recent years to help us really understand our bodies more. Whether you're ready to pop out a mini-me like yesterday, or the thought of being someone's parent after the night you had last night seems light years away, knowledge is power. Understanding how our bodies work to better be able to prepare for the future and take better care of ourselves right now is game-changing. Modern Fertility doesn't just offer fertility testing. It also offers birth control, prenatal vitamins, ovulation and pregnancy tests, and just launched a sperm kit. Because fertility isn't just a woman's job, okay? So click the link in the show notes for $10 off your Modern Fertility hormone test and join the thousands of women who refuse to let fertility be a mystery. Now, back to the show. What's the difference? I mean, obviously it's in the name as well, but like the difference between like fostering and then like fostering to adopt, is that something you guys, are you interested in that? If you are, or you know anything about it, can you speak on that?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we were taught and that foster parents are continually reminded of is foster care is for reunification. That is the purpose of it. We are temporary stand-in parents while their biological family parents, whomever has custody of them, is getting their situation back to where it's appropriate for the child to be with them.
That's always the goal, is reunification. Okay.
And so the process of foster to adopt means that the child has been in the foster care system for whatever reason. The rights have been terminated. At the end of the case, the outcome is that rights are terminated and the child becomes legally free. That means that they can be adopted. There's several different routes. The department and CASA are always going to prioritize biological family, even if they come in at the very last second. Like, you could go through the entire process, and if a biological family member puts their hand up, too bad. Like, you're out of the consideration set. And so that piece of it is always a big sort of headline as well, of like, regardless of the relationship you have with the child, the biological family is always going to come first in terms of placement. And so once they're legally free, routing a permanency plan, whether it be for the foster parents to adopt the child, whether it be a continued search for biological family members, that will basically go on for, I believe it's 6 months that from rights being terminated, but there are sort of some nuances if the child has been with you for the duration of the placement, things like that can sort of inform the duration between rights being terminated and becoming the child's legal guardian.
Okay.
But ultimately, like, the foster to adopt concept is that the child goes through the foster care system. The parents have the opportunity to regain custody of the child. If that's not possible, rights are terminated, and then they find a permanency plan, whatever that may be. And then the court sort of determines who the final guardian is of the child.
Okay. So, like, whether it's foster or foster to adopt, it seems like the end goal is always reunification with biological family. And in order for someone who's not biological to adopt from a foster situation, it'd have to be like pretty extenuating circumstances, like, in order to get to that point.
Yeah, you're last on the list if you're a foster parent.
I mean, how do you kind of emotional? I mean, it sounds like the cases you're taking are more short term, but still I could see like getting just like connecting with a kid quickly. Like, how do you prepare yourself for them to move on if you've developed some kind of attachment to them? And I'm assuming you can't really be in touch with them like after they leave your home.
Yeah, it's hard. I don't think anyone prepares you for the type of grief that you experience.
Yeah.
It's a loss. Even though you know the context and that it's for the right reasons and all of it, doesn't take away the fact that it's a loss.
I think that one thing that we're constantly reminding ourselves of is that it's what we're doing is an act of service. Right? And even from the orientation, that was the focal point of what fostering is all about. Foster families are there to be in service to a child, and also, if the circumstances are right, to a family that is just trying to get it together so that they can regain custody of it. Our main goal and our main priority is giving that child normalcy, love, structure, and stability, and showing them what that looks like and what that feels like until they can return to a place where they can have that with their parents. And in hopes that if things do work out, that we have our feet planted ready for that child to continue to give them that if there's an opportunity to adopt them. But specifically remembering it's an act of service, because when you're in service, there's 99.9% always going to be an end date. Right? There's just going to be a time where it's over, and you've done what you're supposed to do. You know, you've completed your service. So I think that's kind of been our running quote and kind of our running reminder that what we're doing is an act of service, for the child first, and second for the family that's trying to get it together.
Kids are so lucky to have you guys. Like truly, I know like people listening to this like won't understand like the deep love and like history we have together, but like these are two of my favorite people. And when I found out you guys are doing this, I was like, whoever ends up in their home is gonna just be so lucky. I mean, I think it's so incredible you guys are doing this. And do you have any pieces of advice? Like I know you already obviously this whole thing is like one big piece of advice, but anything that I haven't thought to ask you that you would want to share with anybody who's thinking about getting into this?
I would say the biggest thing is there's a misconception that biological parents don't love their children. They love their children. And it may be really confusing to receive a child and read the case notes and be like, how? The reality is it's not about whether they love them or not. It's that they didn't have the resources, capacity, tools, life experience, whatever it may be, to give that child what they needed in that moment, which is stability, safety, things like that are core, and we all think are sort of parts of love. But one of the things that I've learned is that the parents always love their child, and that should never be questioned. Like their choices aren't always ideal and don't necessarily connect to the idea of what we would say loving a child is, but they do love their children. And I think that's something that I've really come to appreciate. It's not necessarily that there's a lack of love. There's a lack of safety, of resources, of learning experience, of what the right things are for a child, and parenting as well. Because, I mean, coming into this as a first-time parent as well, parenting is hard. Like, it's really, really intense, and no one like tells you all of the things that you are teaching this child. It's like there's always these lovely, warm, snuggly headlines of like what parenting is, but there's things where I'm like, I'm literally teaching this child how to eat food, like, and it's not just something that happens naturally. You actually have to facilitate that learning environment. And I'm fresh, brand new, and I've like researched Google into all of the rabbit holes. But the reality is that if you don't have, like, I didn't have that education on what really was required to be a parent. And so folks who don't have the resources I have, of course, they're going to have limited access to that. So I think understanding that dynamic is really important. And I think the other piece that has taken me a really long time to appreciate is there is nothing to do except love that child. You don't have to get involved in the case. You don't have to have opinions on the case. Like, you can try, but it actually doesn't make a difference. There are people there that is literally their job, whether you agree with what they're doing or not, is their job to work through the case and to manage that case, to do what they believe is best for the child and for the parents. And so there is nothing to do but to love and care for that child. That is our only role. And it's really, really hard to accept that, but it's actually much easier when you can do that.
Yeah.
And to expand on that, I would just say empathy and patience play a very big role in this entire process, specifically because, speaking from a place of parents loving their children, the longer you are involved in the case, the more you find out that the parent comes from a family that has either they have a history decades back of their mother being in the system, their grandmother being in the system, them being in the system, and then having a child, and now their child entering the system. So you're dealing with decades of people that have been traumatized, decades of people that have not only been traumatized, but they have not dealt with that trauma.
Yeah.
They don't have access to any sort of mental health help or therapy. So you can't just be empathetic toward the child. You also have to be empathetic toward the parents. And patience, because as a man, being a foster parent, a lot of the children that have come into our home have taken a while to really warm up to me and trust me,
Mm.
even though I come from a place of love and warmth. Especially for men, I think we have to understand that most of the trauma that these children have experienced have unfortunately been because there's been a man in their life that has either not shown up, that has come and used or disrespected their mother, or has used and abused and disrespected them. So they're going to be very wary
Mm.
of men. And, because of that, mainly because men have a tendency to be impatient, I think that it is very important to be very patient with these children, be very, very patient with them, empathetic of the fact that they've experienced some trauma that even some grown folks haven't experienced.
Mm.
They've seen some things and experienced some things that even grown folks haven't experienced.
Yeah.
But definitely patience and empathy, not just for the child, but also for the parents, I think is very, very important.
Yeah. No, I mean those are all amazing pieces of advice, and I mean, I think like empathy and patience in life, point blank period. It's like a skill we all could use more of for sure. Before I let you guys go, can you talk about For the Cubs just so we can spread the word?
Yes, of course. So For the Cubs is products for little kids for eating, sleeping, and soothing. When we're going through our training, we were taught that we needed to, as humans, get 8 to 12 hugs a day to sort of help with that because we all have a tough time getting in our daily hugs.
Yeah.
I designed a weighted plush bear to mimic a hug. So if you can't get your hugs in from significant others, friends, family, whoever, Percy, the weighted plushie, is the bear I designed to sort of help fill that gap. So yeah, it's basically beautiful products for little kids for eating, sleeping, and soothing. With Percy as sort of our hero product, but every order supports kids in foster care through our partner One Simple Wish, and so they are an organization that helps kids connected to foster care and in crisis, where they get to request a wish to be granted. And it can be something as simple as sheets for their bed, or a trip to Disneyland. It can really range. But I feel like being able to grant wishes for these kids gives them a little moment to imagine what's possible in the world. And so I think it's really important that folks that shop with For the Cubs know that their order is helping these wishes come true.
Amazing. Amazing. I love the concept behind it. And ever since I saw you start this, I was like, what an incredible idea, especially Percy. I loved that so much. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to like just share so much very helpful info about this process, what it's like. I've just like loved kind of watching you guys, as much as you've felt it appropriate to share on social media, and just like kind of learning from that process. And I think this will be really helpful for a lot of people. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, of course. And I would just say that if it hasn't scared people away to become a foster parent, because foster care is really, really hard. And you were so kind to say that, kiddos would be lucky to come into our home. Honestly, like we're lucky to have the kids. Like the coolest part is getting to see them flourish and thrive and do some of their firsts. Some of the things that I've been fortunate to witness, like, first meal, first time sitting up, first time crawling, first words, like all of those things, they're really special. And that's such an honor to get to witness that. It's also really sad because you know that their parents are missing out. But when people are like, why are you doing this? Like, it sounds so hard. It's because those moments are like the honor of getting to be a part of their lives and just sort of bearing witness to that aspect of it as well.
How about you, Adam? Any like favorite moments for you?
Yeah. For me, during our first rescue placement, there was a little boy that he was a very special kid. He experienced a lot of neglect. And I think just finally earning his trust and seeing him smile. That was one for me. And then with the current placement we have now, her and I have just kind of had an instant connection. I think, just it's always just that, just feeling that connection is my favorite part of it.
I love it. I love it. And just also, in case I didn't ask this, if people are interested in becoming foster parents, like who should they reach out to? What government agency, like specifically, or can they go? Or if they want to become volunteers with someone like CASA or something? I had a friend who did that for a while and really enjoyed like doing that work. Like, who do they reach out to?
Yeah, if it's for the foster parenting aspect, then it would be the state agency. It sort of takes on a few different names. In Texas, it's the Department of Family and Protective Services. So it's sort of whatever
your state. Okay.
Yeah. CASA, I believe, is a national organization. So if you just Google like CASA and your county, there'll be an organization that can help you there.
Okay. Amazing. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you. Thanks so much to Amy and Adam for being on the show today and sharing their experience with us. If you would like to support For the Cubs, you can do that on Instagram at @for_the_Cubs, or you can go to their website, forthecubs.com. You can follow me on Instagram at Dani Official. That's DAANI Official, and over on TikTok at _Dani Elliott, DANIELLIOTT. First Time for Everything is produced by Sheilas Productions, and our theme song Closer is sung by me, written by me and the Royal Foundry, and produced by the Royal Foundry. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, it is never too late for your first time.